In this video, we're going to talk about how plants reproduce sexually so we can continue to explain how sexual reproduction leads to variation. Many plants, and all flowering plants, reproduce sexually. As we talked about, some of them do have asexual strategies too, but almost all of them use sex some of the time. Within most flowers, which is what we're going to focus on, there is both a male and a female sex organ. The male sex organ is the stamen, the female sex organ is the pistil. If you're trying to remember which one is which, you can remember that because stamen actually has men in it, and it is the male part. Some types of flowers only have one sex organ or the other, though. So it's not that every single type of flower has both male and female parts, although that is the norm. There are some plants that only have a singular biological sex. We can see these different parts here. In a flower, you have the female pistil running up the middle, and then you have the male stamen along the sides. The pistil has a couple of parts to itself as well. The top of the pistil is known as the stigma. This is where the pollen will land so it can transfer its seeds down to the bottom of the flower, or so it can transfer its genes down to the bottom of the flower. At the bottom of the flower, we have the ovule, which is where the female eggs are stored. These have to be fertilized by the male sperm in order for them to develop into seeds. Connecting the pistil and the ovule is a stalk known as the ovary. And if that sounds familiar, because we use the ovary for the name for the female sex organs in animals as well. The stamen, on the other hand, only has two parts to it. It has the anther up at the top, and then it has a filament that holds the anther in place. And that anther is where pollen gets created. The pollen contains the male DNA. It actually contains sperm within it as well. And the pollen can get to places in a lot of different ways. In many species, it's light enough and small enough that it can actually get picked up by the wind. But many other species also use pollinators, small mobile organisms that fly around and are encouraged to come into the flowers so that pollen gets stuck to them and then they'll transfer it to a different flower. Your honeybees and your hummingbirds and sometimes your moths as well. When the pollen and the egg meet, they're able to combine their DNA. And that creates a new organism that inherits some of the variations and biodiversity from their parents. And this process is known as fertilization. Plant seeds are typically hard so that they're resistant to damage, and they are also nutrient rich, allowing them to survive in tough environments. The idea with the seed is not necessarily that it's going to grow right away. Seeds are actually built so that they can stick around for a little while until conditions are just right, and then they can start to grow. And some of them will actually do it for years. In many plants, as well as some animals, they're able to use both sexual and asexual reproduction. Plants will go through all of this big process of sexual reproduction because it creates variation, which is beneficial. But when everything's good, they don't need to. So that's when they'll switch over to asexual reproduction. And some species of plants will actually use both at the same time in order to maximize their chances. But in general, asexual reproduction gets used when conditions are good for life, and sexual reproduction gets used when more variation is needed to create more biodiversity.